Hi guys, it's me, Mrs. Snook. I'm sorry I'm so late in making this video. It's been so crazy transitioning to full-time remote learning. We constantly have all these emails and things going on and different things we need to do that just keep coming up. So I'm sorry for the delay. But for those of you that have been absent the past couple of days and for my remote learners out there, this is going to cover the lecture from Thursday, what was that, the 20th? Or 21st, Thursday the 20, no, I'm off on my dates. This will cover what was lecture from last Thursday, yeah, the 20th, and from this Friday the 24th. So basically just all of chapter 1, section 1. So we're talking about more of sociology basics. What is sociology, and specifically how does it compare to the other social sciences? And our other learning goal is to focus on what is sociology compared to not just to the learning, social sciences, but just really and truly, you know, what is a sociological perspective and what is a sociological imagination. And so first thing, let's talk about a social science. And as we go through this lecture, I suggest that you put these notes into, your notebook. You print them out, however you want to do it. I mean, you really can't print them out, I guess. So just take them in your notebook, write them down, and then, you can use those obviously in your quiz and your test. You can use the internet as well. So when we're talking about a social science, we're talking about a specific discipline, meaning like field of study. And specifically, the social sciences are what I'm interested in. I'm a social studies teacher, meaning I focus on human social behavior. Why do people do the things that they do? And there's many different social sciences out there, and sociology in particular focuses on human behavior, why people do the things that they do, and it really focuses specifically on social interaction, meaning how people relate to one another, how people influence each other. It talks a lot about symbols. So obviously, how do people say goodbye in a culture? How do people say hello? Are there different waves or, kisses that they give to someone or hugs? Do they stand at a certain place? Obviously before COVID. But, how do people basically respond to each other? What are those interactions as people are first starting to perhaps date and then eventually to marry? What kind of social interactions and norms or ways of behaving do we teach our children as far as how they're supposed to act and behave in our society? And we look at things at what's called the micro level, meaning what's happening in relationships, but we also look at things at the macro level, meaning how they're kind of playing out in the United States as a whole. Now, sociology doesn't just focus on social interaction. It's really and truly also about social phenomena, meaning there are different facts or evidence that people are compiling, okay? It's not just like based off one random person's observation. Otherwise, we couldn't call it a true science. Sociologists, just like other scientists, use the scientific method, besides doing like experiments, okay, which is more thought of as quantitative research where you're collecting true data. They do have qualitative research where it's more of a case study and they observe someone over an extended period of time, but then they're still trying to, in a quantifiable manner, meaning in a numerical way, they're trying to kind of catch, okay, how many times do people shake hands? How many times do people stand in a certain corner of an elevator? I mean, think about when you get into an elevator. You might stand in the middle or towards the keypad if you're by yourself, but as more people enter that elevator, you tend to go towards like the four corners. So you're away from other people. That's part of sociology. That's something people study, why you do that. And it has to do with the norms, the way that your parents taught you how to behave in an elevator. It has to do with the fact that you're kind of hesitant to interact with people you don't know. And sociologists have observed this, they've collected data on it, and that's part of that social phenomena. Now, sociology is obviously one type of social science or social studies. And you probably at this point have taken other ones. For example, you took history, obviously in US history, and maybe you took ancient history or Civ and throughout your elementary school years into middle school. Junior year, you take political science or government class. Okay, so what kind of different rulers does each country have in power compared to history focuses on studying the past? You need to take some kind of economic credit before you graduate. So economics focuses on the fact that there are unlimited wants and limited resources. For example, this week my son knew he was going back to school. His school is doing a hybrid model, so they're only going 2 days a week. The other 3 days a week are online. Well, he needed a device. He needed a tablet, and he broke his. And so all week he's been bugging me about how he needs this. And I'm like, you do need this. You also want it because he really just wants to play Minecraft. But I'm like, you don't have any money. So what are we going to do about it? You've got to find a way to figure it out on your own. Now, that wasn't entirely true. We'd already bought him the tablet. He just didn't know it. And I just didn't want to tell him that. I wanted him to kind of understand you have to save your money. You need to stop buying all sorts of stuff, online and at Walmart, and using his money on Roblox and all sorts of other junk. So you have to teach kids, a little bit about the value of money here. But economics is something we face every day. The fact that we all want stuff, but we don't have the money for it. And that's obviously at the individual level, but also governments at, a national level. What do you do if you have many people who are unemployed or homeless? How do you fix that? How do you stimulate growth in an economy? And there's some kind of class, whether you take econ with Brewer or AP Macro Micro with Hardison, or I think Ms. Stern has some classes that are more consumer ec based, but there's something you have to take to fulfill that credit. So you understand, obviously how to make a budget, how to figure out how you're going to spend money during your life. Now, for number 1 and 2, I kind of started at the bottom of the list because psychology and anthropology are the most closely related classes as far as the social science goes. Psychology is when you are studying an individual. So we're focusing more so on mental health issues. We're focusing on their past history, their relationship with their family. We're trying to figure out what makes someone tick. Okay, someone who goes into psychology obviously could be a psychologist or a psychiatrist if they choose to go to med school so they could administer medicine. Sociology is very similar because we do look at the social interaction part. We do try to figure out what makes people do the things that they do, but we're more so in sociology. Here's the difference between sociology and psychology. We're looking at things from the group perspective in sociology. We're trying to figure out what makes the group do something. So they would be studying, for example, suicide rates. Okay, do suicides go up, during a certain time in history? Is that related to economic factors such as a depression? Is it related to health problems? Is it related to war? So they're looking at a group. They're not looking at an individual the way a psychologist would to try to figure out perhaps why that one person decided to commit suicide. The other social science, which is closely related to sociology, is anthropology, and they study culture. So they'd be looking at different groups of people around the world, and do they eat the same foods? Do they celebrate the same rites of passage? And when I say rites of passage, obviously in America, when you're 16, the big thing that happens is, I'm sure you know, you get your driver's license, right? So it's kind of a mark of an adult. And when you're 18, you can vote and all sorts of things, and 21, obviously, purchase alcohol, that kind of thing. So in other cultures, though, what rites of passage do they have to mark that they are now an adult, or they can get married or date or, start a family? So every society has their own cultural different rites of passage, ways of exhibiting beauty. We call these cultural particulars, ways of expressing themselves. And anthropologists like to study past and present cultures and kind of make references and comparisons. In our next unit, our first unit here is kind of dry, kind of basic, I'm not going to lie. It's got a lot of just the basic info, which a lot of you might not find exciting. The next unit is really cool, though, and it's really what more sociology is about, is we look at other cultures and we kind of explore their cultural patterns. Now, let's get into the other main focus of today. So I know I started off kind of slow today. I have a headache today. I think that's pretty obvious. But not only in this first section are we looking at what is sociology, how does it correspond to the other social sciences, but we're looking at 2 main ideas, which are called the sociological perspective and the sociological imagination. Now, the other day I posted a video, and it was the 3 little pigs, and you might have wondered, why did she post that? Is she crazy? Slightly, but I posted the 3 little pigs video because I'm sure you're familiar with the nursery story, right? The 3 little pigs. And how the big bad wolf came and he huffed and he puffed and he blew their house down. Well, obviously, that's one side of the story. If you did watch that video the other day about the true story of the little pigs, it is a children's book, obviously, and it was made into a little YouTube video, which I kind of thought was rather interesting. And if you watch that video, it tells the story about how the wolf is not bad, and he just wanted a cup of sugar for his dear old granny's birthday cake, and he couldn't help it that, well, he had a bad cold and he sneezed. I think the wolf had COVID. And so, yeah, the poor piggies ended up dying and their house blew down. It happens, and that's basically the moral of the story. think there's something going on with my computer charger. I think you guys can see that in the video where it says low battery. I've been playing with it here. So the story of the wolf, of the Three Little Pigs from the wolf perspective, is vastly different. That, he's innocent, he was framed, he goes to jail, he didn't mean to kill them, blah, blah, blah. It's all about perspective here. Everybody has their own perspective about how the world works, and it has to do with how you were raised. It has to do with your social class. It has to do with how much money your family has, your religious beliefs, your values. And what sociology is saying is we're challenging you to look at the world from a different perspective, to not just accept common sense, but to question it. And when I say common sense, 100 years ago, it was common sense that women did not vote. Women first gained the right to vote 100 years ago last week. Otherwise, up until that point, oh no, women shouldn't be in politics. They should be at home in the kitchen. You go back, obviously, 200 years, and you're going to go back to a time period in America of slavery. So, that was common sense, yet obviously it's not common sense today, or what we refer to as like conventional wisdom. So sociology is saying you need to challenge the perspective of others. You need to think outside the box. You need to try to look at the world from a different viewpoint. And sociologists in particular, they're looking for the hidden meanings behind human actions. What makes people do the things they do? And some sociologists, we'll talk in our next, in section 3 of this chapter, we'll talk about how they have different viewpoints. Some of them are more optimistic, and they say, look, America has social problems. We can fix them. The world has social problems. We can work on improving them. Other people have more of a pessimistic view, what we call the conflict perspective. And they say, okay, maybe we can't fix the problems, but we can maybe fix some of them. They admit there's lots of problems. They see that they exist. They see that they're not going away anytime soon, but they still are going to try to fix some of them. And they're taking on a different viewpoint. They're trying to walk a mile, so to speak, in someone else's shoes. Other sociologists are what we call the symbolic interactionist sociologists. And they really look at what we call the strange and the familiar, or the general and the particular. So for example, I'll give you an example of 2 nights ago, my son's tooth fell out. So not last night, but the night before. We've had crazy days at our house lately. And in America, we have this strange custom that when your kid's tooth falls out, you hide it under their pillow. And the next day, the tooth fairy supposedly comes and brings them money. It's strange. You can look into the kind of the folklore, the legend behind all that. It's interesting to kind of look it up. So it's normal to us. But in reality, other cultures learning about this tradition think it's incredibly strange. Like, why would you take a tooth, a part of your body that fell out, that's got blood on it perhaps, put it under your pillow, sleep on it, and then tell your kid that some random person, fairy figure will come in your house in the middle of the night and give your kid money? The whole thing is bizarre. And if you look at it in that lens, from a different perspective, you can see why it's strange. And so what sociologists are saying is other cultures may think some of the things that we do are strange, especially if you start to examine, and really look at them. And so if we look at other people's cultures, you might say, that's so weird. Why do they have to take off, the shoes right when they come into the house? Or why is the bottom of their foot basically a way of telling someone a curse word or telling them to flip off, so to speak, the way you flip someone the bird in America? It's just different cultural patterns or symbols or traditions of ways of behaving. And so that's what they're saying by the strange and the familiar. It may be familiar to us, but it really is kind of strange if you stop and think about it, if you really look at the particular parts of our society. And so the sociological perspective is just saying, can you look at things from a different worldview, not just accept what you've been told? And the goal of this is perhaps to gain empathy for others, to help solve problems, and not just to kind of challenge what you've been told. Now, going along with this idea, we also have something called the sociological. I'm going to go back just for a second there. I realize my screen is a little bit off. And this is we're almost done. We're down to our last 2 slides here. There we go. So the last thing to talk about here is something called the sociological imagination. So kind of building off of that sociological perspective that asks you to think outside the box, to challenge yourself, to see the world in a different view, to realize that other cultures may see some of the things we do as strange, not to just accept common sense, to try to see what problems are plaguing people, to try to improve the world and gain empathy. The sociologist named C. Wright Mills, he's a famous sociologist, he coins, meaning he comes up with this term called the sociological imagination. And all that basically means is he says you need to use your imagination and you need to put yourself in someone else's shoes. The sociologist Max Weber basically calls it verstehen. Okay, I'll talk more about that later when we get to section 2. But verstehen is a German word, and it basically means just walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. It's so easy to judge people, based off what you see on social media or what you saw at school and how they acted and how they behaved, but you don't know their life. You don't know if they get criticized when they come home or if they deal with mental abuse or physical abuse. You don't know if there's alcoholism in their home, if their parents suffer from a gambling addiction, or if they're, suffering from cancer. People have their own problems, and it's very difficult to understand what they're going through. And so C. Wright Mills says, everyone has a sociological imagination. You can put yourself in someone else's shoes. You can try to understand what they've been experiencing. You can try to see the world from a different lens. All you have to do is try. And if you can do that, you can gain empathy. You can try to help others. You can fix the problems, and it's not going to be easy. And part of the sociological imagination is really focusing on the larger world as a whole. So you're really focusing on major events. The best way I can explain this to you is after 9/11 happened, it was life-changing, for so many people in my generation. I can remember being at college that day. I can remember going to work, and class had gotten out early. We'd only had 15 minutes of class that morning, and the professor never showed up. The teaching assistant let us go, and then I went to college. I went to my job at the Purdue University admissions office. I was only there 5 seconds, and they said the towers got hit. I tried listening to it on the radio from work, and I was too nervous. I had a relative who lived in New York City, and I left. I mean, we were very scared. We were thinking, like, what's going to happen now? Are we all going to get attacked? And it's hard for you guys to understand because you weren't alive at the time. But it led to obviously all these differences as far as our economy, as far as terrorism, safety, leading us to the war in Iraq, leading us to the war in Iran, or not Iran, the war in Afghanistan, sorry. And, leading to different safety protocols. It led to the Patriots Act as far as providing more identification when you went to like a bank or things. So it had all these other impacts. And, that was obviously a major world event. So C. Wright Mills basically says that you have to understand that people have gone through all sorts of things during their lifetimes. Sometimes it's more on the personal level, but sociology really says it's probably also at a large group level, and it's had all sorts of impacts on these people's lives. Think about COVID. COVID is impacting all of you individually. Some of you have perhaps had individual experiences with it. Some of you have not. But you've all been impacted by it, right? With your choice to do remote learning, with wearing masks at school, perhaps worried about your health. Maybe we'll all be germaphobes in the future and worry about cleaning things. Obviously, it's having long-term impacts most likely on our economy, even on this upcoming election. So as different world events happen, they impact people in such a huge way. And hopefully the goal of this class is now you can go back and you can think about the Great Depression, World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, and try to understand that these people, it may seem strange the choices they made, but it's so hard for us to judge them because we weren't alive then, we didn't walk in their shoes. Now, the last thing to say today is that, just to give you another example of using the sociological imagination on a daily life or a daily basis, is looking at a picture like this. And you see a picture of this man, it says, I need a job. You've probably seen things like this before around the Quad Cities. You see homeless people. How do you respond? Do you give him a sandwich? Do you give him $5? Do you keep on driving? Do you say he's a bum, he should get a job? None of those answers are necessarily correct. I mean, I can tell you growing up in the Chicago suburbs that whenever we would go into the city, my parents told me to like avoid people like this, like the plague, and he's a bum and he's a drunk and don't give him any money and he'll spend it on booze. I'll be honest, those are the things they said. And I love my parents, but they said all sorts of stuff like that. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized, okay, that could be true, but there might be more to this story. It could be that, he's had a terrible life and his wife and kids were killed in some car accidents and he doesn't have any other family and he was incredibly depressed and, he didn't have a lot of money. He might be a vet suffering from PTSD. We don't know what their story is. And so before we're so quick to judge, the sociological imagination says maybe there are other, reasons why this happened. And so when it comes to something like that, where someone who's unemployed and homeless Is it just a personal problem, or could it be society's problem as well? All right, that wraps up our lecture for today. Have a great day, guys.